Welcome to the journey that we are about to take about Old Sparta. We shall journey along Main Street, now Sparta Line, as far as the Old Sparta Cheese Factory. Then we shall proceed along various parts of Old King Street, now Quaker Road. We shall see places of business, houses of worship, residential dwellings, and note characteristics which distinguish each. It is with the penetration of the area by French traders and missionaries that we obtain our first written records of the area. The first Caucasian to describe a sojourn with the neutrals, Atawandrians, who occupied the area was the Franciscan friar Father Joseph de la Roche Daillon, in a letter dated July 16, 1627. Corn, squash, and tobacco were grown. Fish abounded in the streams, and deer, bear, wild pigeon, and small game in the forests and meadows. The black squirrel abounded along the shores of Lake Erie. Chestnut trees furnished food for man and beast. However, fierce trade and territorial rivalries broke out. In the ensuing disturbances, the neutrals were scattered. The general area had only sporadic native habitation. The French priests Gallinet and Dollier de Casson passed through the area in 1670 and were much impressed by its natural beauty and fertility. The traveller Charlevoix noted the abundant forests. The whole of present-day Western Ontario passed into the hands of the British Crown by the Treaty of Paris in 1763. Following the ensuing American Revolution and subsequent peace treaty, large numbers of United Empire Loyalists made their way north, but none came to this part of British North America. It was during the tenure of Sir John Grey Simcoe, Lieutenant Governor of the newly created province of Upper Canada, that settlers and land developers cast serious eyes on Sparta and its environs. Aide-de-camp Thomas Talbot hoped to gain land here, but large sections had already been ceded to the Honorable James Babby, a legislative councillor, and it was to Babby that a Pennsylvania Quaker, Jonathan Doane, applied for land. In 1813, with his grandson Jonathan Steele, Doane came to what is now Sparta and proceeded to make a shelter just west of the present Friends Cemetery. He proceeded to purchase 200 acres of land for himself, Lot 7, Concession 4, in June of 1813. In July 1816, 3,000 acres in Concessions 3 and 4 were purchased from Babby for £1,125. These lands were to be used by the Quakers whom Doane was representing. These people soon came in considerable numbers. Doane himself had 10 children. In 1814, the Jacob Preffer, Calvin Witt, Isaac Minor, Jesse Page, Thomas Millard, and William and George Parker families arrived. Later, William Harvey, Samuel Scott, John Mills of New York State, Joseph Albertson, and John Kipp arrived. Some drove cattle by bush trails, while others coasted the shore of Lake Erie in scows. The foregoing and many others proceeded to establish themselves and their families. Jonathan Doane built a tannery, and one of the Zavances, who were millwrights, erected a grist mill on the creek. Among the early buildings constructed by the Quakers was a meeting house, and they formally established a Quaker meeting. Reuben and Sarah Haight and their 12 children were important early Quakers. Soon, a few Methodists came to the area. They had the pleasure of being visited by Reverend George Ryerson, a saddlebag preacher and brother of the great Edgerton Ryerson. The memory of the founder of Methodism, John Wesley, was still very prominent. The first physician, Dr. Hawkins, arrived in 1820, while Dr. John T. Wilson arrived a few years later. It was in this early period of the settlement that the blacksmith shop was erected. A pit was dug in a clay bank, water added, straw scattered on this, and oxen tramped down the mixture, which then built into walls over 2 feet thick. Doors and window frames were set into this structure. This old shop, erected about 1827, has seen great use. In 1844 it was donated to the Women's Institute by Edgar Smith. Horses were still shod there until the 1940s. Today, the blacksmith shop, now called the Forge and Anvil, is owned by the Sparta and District Historical Society. It serves as a valuable repository of the area's artifacts. The settlement was known as the Corners. In December 1834, a meeting of landowners decided to call it Sparta. It is believed to be in this home that this was decided. At this time, classical names were much in vogue. Nearby settlements had names such as Corinth, Troy, and so on. This custom was also followed in the neighboring United States. The early 19th century saw the rise of reform movements. Upper Canada was not immune. Jacksonian democracy was having a powerful influence in the United States. Even in Great Britain, the first Reform Bill was passed in 1832. Here, William Lyon Mackenzie and others pressed for responsible government. Such a concept would make the Legislative Assembly and not the Lieutenant Governor and his appointees the real power. Dr. Charles Duncombe was a leading reformer in our area of the province. Strong local supporters for vigorous action were Joshua Doane, son of Jonathan Doane, and George Lawton. Doane fled to the United States after the abortive rebellion of 1837. However, he had the misfortune to return at the raiding party at Windsor in 1838. He was captured, tried, and hanged. The Quakers brought his body back to Sparta and interred it in the Friends Cemetery, which lies to the west of the village. His grave has a simple marker. His life and death have inspired at least one novel. We shall now journey along the main street of the village, now called Sparta Line. Standing at the corners where Main Street and King Street intersect, now Sparta Line and Quaker Road, we shall commence with Sparta House. It was constructed about 1840 by David Mills. For a time, it was operated as a hotel. Subsequently, it was a hardware and general store for a very long time. The west part of the building housed an undertaking business run by Louis Modinger, a local entrepreneur and longtime owner of the building. Here's the hearse operated by Modinger. Next door was the Abbey, which housed the True Teller, a short-lived local newspaper. The printing press was similar to one now on display in the Forge and Anvil. Today, the Abbey is the home and studio of Peter Robson. We have already alluded to the construction of the blacksmith shop. It is immediately next to the Abbey. Further along the north side of Main Street, we see the Sparta Continuation School erected in 1927. These schools were vital for the later community and had grades 9 to 12. My mother came and taught here shortly after the school was opened, met my father, and the rest is history, as they say. Going further west along Main, we find the nicely proportioned home of the Modingers. It has original clapboard siding and a finely decorated veranda and gable. Louis Modinger Jr. lived here until his death about 1940. His daughter Helen, who has just died, resided in this dwelling throughout her life. The growing agricultural community needed innovative ways to market their produce. The Sparta Cheese Factory was organized, and for a long while its cheese was widely marketed. The factory was located near the creek on land presently owned by Ray Little and his wife. For a short time, the Littles canned tomatoes in this factory. As a youth in the 1940s, I distinctly recall the Donnelly family who were the cheesemakers. If a boy asked for a sample of cheese, they would cut a huge piece from one of the cheeses. The whey was stored in a large vat on the east side of the factory. It was returned to the members, who fed this byproduct to their hogs. Nothing was wasted. Unfortunately, The rise of large corporations and stringent new laws have doomed the small cheese factories. Not a single one remains in the whole of Elgin County. On a recent trip to the state of Wisconsin, I noticed that the cheese factory is still a staple of their landscape. On a hill behind the cheese factory lies the Amos Canby House. A summer kitchen was attached to the west of the building and has been bricked in. The front has a two-door facade. Overall, the home is an excellent example of the Quaker colonial style. Now let us return to the corners and proceed along the south side of Main Street. You will see the Aiken store on the southeast corner. Subsequently, the Oyles, a prominent local family, operated the general store and post office for a very long time. In my boyhood, Eric Oyle and later his son Norman carried on the business. This store not only carried a complete line of groceries but also dry goods. The last named items were much in demand by the local women. Today, this old store houses anything used, a prosperous business run by the Muscats. Directly across the street from the oil store was a branch of the Sterling Bank of Canada. Subsequently, this became the Imperial Bank of Canada. With the demise of its use as a bank, the building became a private dwelling. Today, this building houses supplies used by the Muscats in their business. Immediately west of the old bank lies the building currently known as the Temperance House. Built in the 1840s, it has seen many owners. A tavern and local hotel business was conducted here throughout from the time of its construction until the rising temperance movement succeeded in closing the tavern. This was not done without a struggle. Reverend J.J. Baker, the Baptist minister, and others succeeded in revoking the tavern's license. This provoked a noisy demonstration, which threatened to torch Baker's residence. Baker's son, later a professor at Guelph, attests to the authenticity of this story. A joint stock company operated the premises. The name of Temperance House has stuck. Today this building is owned by Norma Roberts and houses several enterprises. Next to the Temperance House is the Israel Doan home. In earlier times, a livery stable lay immediately west of the old hotel, but it has been removed. We don't use carriages as much as we formerly did. Israel served as the local constable for many years. In modern times, this home and adjacent buildings were owned by the Fishley family. The building next to their home had served as the tin shop. It has a boomtown or false front and is of board and batten construction. This served as the butcher shop under the Fishleys. Part of the building served as an ice house. The last name was a vital commodity as an early refrigerant. The carefully stowed blocks of ice were packed in sawdust. This method of storage is still practiced in remote areas of northern Ontario. Next to the butcher shop is the oil house. John Oil practiced his trade across the street in the blacksmith shop. This home is a good example of plain Quaker construction. Its original windows contribute greatly to its significance. The house is nicely balanced and reminds us of the principles used in construction by the early Quakers. For many years, the next building was the Sparta Telephone Exchange. It has since been demolished. Rural telephone companies long persisted and were a mark of progress and ingenuity. Today, Bell Telephone maintains a small station at the rear of this property. The first building west of today's Hiram Smith Lane, formerly Smith Street, is the building erected by Hiram Smith. It served as a general store and tailor shop. Hiram owned a good deal of land in and about Sparta. He erected a stately Georgian home for himself and his numerous progeny further west on Main Street. The Hiram Smith store is stoutly constructed of local brick and fine eave returns. In later years, it was operated by several generations of the Gorvat family. Eugene Rollison, husband of the late Helen Gorvat Rollison, is the current occupant. Immediately next to the Hiram Smith General Store is an early home of Hiram Smith. It is a frame home which served as his residence until he built Ridgeview. Hiram Jr. lived there following his father and ran the store. The Crocker family lived there for a long time until the Lundys bought it in the late 20th century. A little further to the west we find the Old Dominion Hotel. Now it has been made into two houses. The old Baptist parsonage lies next. It has been refurbished and is now the home of Robert and Barbara Burns. He is an historian formerly employed by Parks Canada. Reverend Sherman was long associated with the local church and was sold the home by the congregation. This home is a good example of Greek revival, with its returned eaves, pilastered entrance with Doric capitals, and entablature. Next to this home is one currently owned by the Enrights. For a considerable part of the 20th century, the Warrens lived there. Florence Warren was a long-time curator of the Tweedsmuir history of Sparta. This house has original 12-pane windows and wood clapboard siding. The front pilastered doorway has impressive entablature. Ridgeview, which stands on a hill at the end of a spruce-lined driveway, is in the Georgian style. Its front entrance leads to a spacious center hall. It is a full two-story structure in pleasing handmade strawberry-colored brick. The 6/6 glass with larger panes helps to date it in the 1860s. The bake oven and smokehouse nearby are still in operation. The home is owned by John and Sally Smith Martyn. Mrs. Martyn is a great-granddaughter of Hiram Smith. The Second Baptist Parsonage, situated almost across from the church, has had extensive renovations. Its gable has layered decorative edging and decorative woodwork in the pediment above the porch. It too has been sold and is currently the residence of the Hindleys. A few doors to the west lies the mud cottage. It has adobe walls, as does the blacksmith shop. It is in the Regency style, with recessed doors and many original windows. At the rear is a truncated gable. The roof has a skylight. The owners have kept this home in good condition over the years. The prominent home on the hill near the western entrance to the village is our next stop. It was built by John Kipp and later became the home of Dr. Sanderson. It is of clapboard and 21-pane windows. The decorated front entrance is especially well done. Before leaving this western side of Sparta, we shall pause to view the Sparta maple. Successive reconstructions of the road have destroyed all vestiges of it. There was an agreement that the stagecoach which daily ran between St. Thomas and Sparta did not pick up any mail between the Aiken store and the Sparta Maple. A number of citizens regularly commuted to St. Thomas and back on business. The speaker's great-grandfather was among them. We shall now return to the corners and journey north on King Street. To our right lies the Edmund Smith home. It is built in the Greek Revival style, with pilastered doorway with entablature and side lights and solid frieze. The building has 12-pane windows and wood clapboard siding. It is in very good condition and is owned by Ray and Vera Martyn. Across the street lies the Very House. It is of board and batten construction with a Gothic window, gingerbread trim, and a steep pitch roof. It is the oldest house in the village and has been in the Harvey family for many generations. A venerable white pine sits on the front lawn. Next to the very house is the Alvin J. home. J. operated a sawmill and used choice walnut for much of the interior. It is of yellow brick with nicely bracketed eaves and nicely proportioned windows. For a long while it was owned by Dr. Lee Elliott, who was Sparta's last remaining resident physician. He was an ear, eye, nose, and throat specialist. I well remember going to him for a prescription. His wife, Audra Smith, lived in the mud cottage with her mother and father prior to her marriage. Extensive mention has already been made of Sparta's Quakers. Their first meeting house was on Doan's property to the west of the village. The current meeting house was built in 1865 on the northern outskirts of the village. It is modeled on similar structures in the United States. A sliding partition divides the worship area into a men's and women's section. Women played an equal part in the services. Serena Menard was a distinguished Quaker minister. The building is a model of simplicity and situated in a fine maple grove. Sparta is still an active meeting. As earlier noted, the Methodists arrived in some force and made their presence known. In 1886, the present church and manse were constructed. The yellow brick of the two structures nicely complement one another. The interior of the church has wainscoting and a nicely finished ceiling and supporting beams. The manse is in the High Gothic tradition. Currently, it serves as a store called Art in the Manse. Since 1925, the church has been part of the United Church of Canada. The street to the south of the church was known as Church Street. Recently, restructuring of street names has resulted in it being renamed Methodist Street. As mentioned earlier, Baptists came to the settlement in some numbers. In 1869, the present building was opened. The original frame structure was later bricked in. The Baptists were active in the temperance movement. A relic of the horse-drawn era, a special stepping stone to assist one to alight from a buggy, was removed recently. The congregation is still active. While still considering the churches, we may examine the honor rolls hung there. Those memorials for World War I listed 43 serving, of whom 5 died. 43 are listed for the Second War, of whom 3 died. Those who passed in the second conflict were Clayton Burke, William Henderson, and Duncan Pryor. Being pacifists, the Quakers did not serve in combat. Mention has already been made of the construction of the Sparta Continuation School in 1927. The original Sparta Public School was a one-room red brick structure. In 1908, a larger two-room school was constructed. It is now a private dwelling. This, then, concludes a visual history of Old Sparta. A representative number of buildings have been included. More buildings should be designated and an historical district established.